Live everywhere on netrootsradio.com. David Waldman, Kagro, in the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, October 20th, 2023. We're getting into the late days of October. Oh, we had an Ides of October, and we forgot all about it. All right, well, we passed right by it. Taking these opportunities where you find these 31-day months to remind everybody there's Ides all over the place. Anyway, I guess we won't get that chance again until December, and really nobody cares about the Ides of December. People are worried about other things by that point. Okay, so I sound, I don't know, am I congested? What's going on? It doesn't feel like it, but it sounds like it in my headphones here. There's a deep and sonorous bass that isn't usually there in the voice today, but it sounds somehow like congestion. All right. Well, take it when you can get, and move on. So, hey, yesterday you may have been listening to the show, and then all of a sudden you may not have been listening to the show. Yes, so I made some apology about that via social media yesterday, but those of you returning and not hearing from me since last show, wanting to know why was the show half an hour shorter than usual. Did I have some important pressing engagement? Was there an emergency? And Scott's summary, I saw, I guess some people must have thought, things have finally exploded, or there's a nuclear war and they took out Virginia or something, or, some kind of emergency took out the internet. And it was none of those things. It was a simple mistake. My usual procedure here, and in any given day, I set alarms on the phone and sit it next to the desk, and at the correct intervals, more or less, the alarm goes off and reminds me, okay, it's time to take our first section break. At 10:27, my alarm goes off. That gives me 30 seconds to get the music started. When the music starts, that gives me, I think, a minute and a half or something like that, or a minute, I don't know, but to get to the properly timed break. All of this is synchronized with Justice in, Hawaii or Seattle or wherever, the West Coast haven that he lives on. It's never been Hawaii, of course. It's always been Pacific Northwest, but everything very carefully coordinated. And of course, because we're all working off of the same time, because I think all of our clocks and phones are all coordinated. And I guess if Apple headquarters ever goes down, we'll never know what time it is. I don't know exactly how that works, by the way. Anyway, doesn't matter until it doesn't work. So 9:27, 9:58. Because not 57, because it's only a 1-minute break at the top of the hour. You get the idea. 10:27, same thing. Then at the end of the show, it's a 10:57 alarm, but the 10:57 alarm alerts me to the fact that the longer, drawn-out outro music doesn't go on at 10:57 and 30 seconds. I wait 45 seconds, more or less. But these days, of late, I find myself reading something that I want to cram in before the end of the show, and it lingers, and I don't end up hitting the button until it's almost 10:58 or even later. And then it's, how long is the outro? In fact, here's the music. The only way for me to figure this out is to hit the button and see how long it runs. So don't worry, I'm not ending the show just yet. All right, so it's 2 minutes or 1 minute and 58 seconds approximately of outro music. And so then, that gives me the audio cues of how long I have to get the rest of the article out, when I need to pause and let the last announcement go out, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, what happened yesterday was the alarm for 10:27 goes off, And I'm distracted and I'm reading something. But at that point, I don't know. I'm exhausted. I was very tired. There had been a marathon meeting the night before doing my temple president thing. And as you might imagine, that job has become a lot more complicated of late because, of course, events in Israel end up screwing up your life and schedule here in the United States as well. Anyway, 10:27 alarm goes off. I'm talking, trying to get the words out. I'm reaching over and I'm tapping at the surface of the phone to shut the alarm up, just so it doesn't go out over the air for too long. Sometimes it responds, sometimes it doesn't, whatever. Anyway, basically, out of the corner of my eye, I see things. I interpret the 10:27 alarm as 10:57, and I'm tired. It feels like 10:57. I go... Basically, I hit the outro button. I think everything's fine. I think it's the end of the show. I really felt that it was. And, then I just behave accordingly. The music comes on is the end of the show thing. And I think, except for right now, like if I hit the button right now, I won't be automatically believing that the show is over because I'm conscious of this. But if this music comes on and it's late and I'm tired, you could probably fool me into believing it's the end of the show. But it wasn't. But I hit the button as though it was anyway and just cut off. So from the listener's point of view, of course, the third portion break is scheduled to come up. And it comes up regardless of what music I'm playing. But because I start the music late with the outro, 45 seconds instead of 30 seconds or even later, what ended up happening was I just talked my way straight into the break, thinking I have more time, but I don't. And then I just didn't come back from the break because I turned the thing off. The show's done. Thank God. I'm exhausted. I need to take a break. And I went straight to taking care of some other things. And I ended up just stopping to make a post on one or another of the social media sites. And I took a screenshot of something that I wanted to share. And when I went to plug the screenshot into the Blue Sky not tweet or whatever, and I noticed, in the Mac fashion, it labels or it names the file with the date and time. And I see this thing that says 10:45:03, and I was like, oh, 10:45:03. So what's my first thought? Oh no, no. My first thought is, the clock on my computer is screwed up. It's 11. Why does it think it's 10:45? So, I look up in the corner, and sure enough, at this point, it says like 10:48, and I said, I wonder how my clock got screwed up. What happened here? Is it the end of daylight savings time? No, I don't think so. And that wouldn't happen on a Thursday, most likely, and not like this either. And we decided we're going to stagger giving back the hour this year. 15 minutes this week, 15 minutes next week. That actually would probably be pretty good, except for screwing with your clocks. So I said, I wonder if the clocks on my other computers are all screwed up, and took a look, and oh yeah, this one says 10:48 too. What happened to all the clocks? Check my phone. 10:48. All the clocks in this house are wrong. I can't believe it. It's definitely 11:08. Not, and then it begins to dawn on me. Oh, as I begin to get text messages. Hey, you're off the air. Hey, you didn't come back from break. What? So, I didn't come back from break because it's the end of the show. What's wrong with you? Oh. So I realized this about, I guess, fully 10 minutes later. And at that point, I was like, well, I don't know whether it's a great idea to try and come back and finish the show at this point. I don't think it's likely to work. So it's a short show. So here we are today. We have a lot to do now. We got an extra half an hour worth of stuff that we didn't get to put in yesterday's show that maybe we should try to cram in here today. All right, let's see. I'm getting messages, or I got messages yesterday. Maybe was it people? No, not really complaining about my having disappeared from the air, but. Let's see. What have we here? Asparagus zucchini. Mark sends us this comment here. If you ever listen to a Washington Post automated read article. How do you like that? It's very nice how the word GOP keeps coming up here. So they are let's see, what's the article he was reading or had an AI reader doing it? Is that what he said? Or automated reading at any rate. Let's see. Stonewall Jordan marches Republicans into the wilderness. That's Dana Milbank's headline on this piece. And there, I guess, does the automated reader read GOP as GOP? Is that what's going on? I mean, that's good. I think that we should be reading it and pronouncing it that way. It's just nice. So I guess, if I cut out early on the show and you just want to feel at home, use the Washington Post automated reader to read stories about the Republican Party, and you'll feel like the show is still going on. All right, let's see. The other, look at this. Matthew Rigdon sends this. Why didn't I see all these comments last night? All right, well, they're all on Mastodon, so I'm getting to them now. The weird follow-up to the story. Oh, remember this one about did we decide? Is it? We decide. I mean, it is a popular recording artist. Everybody knows how his name is pronounced, except me. I forget. But Pras Michel, is that right? Or Michael? But Michel, Pras Michel, Haitian, right? So weird follow up to the story about him and his trial. You remember that? That was an odd story. Did we? I don't know if we ever got to the end of that story, but it was weird enough what we got in there. So the follow-up is he's appealing the verdict on the grounds that his attorney used AI to craft his closing statement. And well, some other deficiencies too. That is an interesting complaint. I don't know how far that one goes. I don't think there's anything inherently going to get your a conviction reversed. But I guess if he's got some other complaints and deficiencies, he might be able to lean on those instead. All right, let's see. So a couple of things happened yesterday. One, they ended up calling off the third speaker vote for Jim Jordan, and that was fun and funny both. But I understand that they might actually just be going straight back to it. But they delayed the vote yesterday and decided not to hold it. But he isn't dropping out. And as I understand the current state of affairs, there was at first a proposal floated by Jordan to temporarily empower Patrick McHenry to handle bills, especially the important ones that they think they need to deal with in the next couple of weeks. The emergency appropriations for the various overseas situations, Ukraine, Israel, and a few others that they tossed in there. I remember yesterday we were ticking them off, and I think Lindsey Graham wanted to include Taiwan, except that's not at the same stage, but maybe that tells us a little bit about what Lindsey Graham has in mind for Taiwan. But that, and of course, either a CR or finishing up the budget and appropriations this year. But apparently that plan has fallen apart. So Politico reports that the House GOP has abandoned the plan to empower the temporary speaker, McHenry, and I guess some discussion of exactly why that might be. Let's see. What are we looking here? Caitlin Emma, Jordan Carney, Sarah Ferris writing this for Politico yesterday. House abandons this plan. Jim Jordan, who earlier on Thursday indicated that he would pause speaker balloting and back the idea, now could reverse course and go to the floor again. And I think that's the current plan now, except I don't know when they plan to hold another vote. But again, it looks like he's losing ground over all of this time too. But all right, I'll read you the article as we'll see whether they discuss the strategery of it, if you will. House Republicans are abandoning a push to empower a temporary speaker, and you know which one, Representative Patrick McHenry, after it faced fierce pushback within the party on Thursday, as they left a nearly 4-hour internal meeting about the idea. And I understand that pissed a lot of them off. They were very sour on the whole thing, having been trapped in a meeting for 4 hours. Multiple Republicans said there was virtually it says virtually no path forward. I think they just mean virtually no path forward. The proposal which may still come back for a vote at some point, would have allowed McHenry and the GOP, get it, to reopen the House after 16 days without a speaker. Many Republicans view that task as critical, given pending deadlines on government spending and an imminent White House aid request for Israel and other nations in crises. It certainly does not have the support in conference, and to bring it to the floor, it would have to survive with Democratic votes. Oh my God, and you know how much they hate that. Can't have Democratic votes helping you succeed in any way. Why would you need cooperation of more than one party when you're so dysfunctional? All right, well, that was the comment of Representative Kat Kamek. It looks like cat hammock in a way, but it isn't. Kat Kamek of Florida. We're currently sitting on a tinderbox. Ouch. What is this thing doing? Okay, I say anyway, it could light a fire under us. So to do that, it would set off the fuse that would certainly end in civil war within the GOP. It's okay with me. And I don't believe that anybody wants to do that. I mean, I do, but I'm not in the GOP. So Representative Byron Donalds, also of Florida, summed it up succinctly. The resolution is dead. It's the latest setback for House Republicans who have foundered in near total bedlam. Wow. Since 8 Republicans joined with Democrats, I knew that was terrible, to oust former Speaker Kevin McCarthy 16 days ago. No member of their conference, including Speaker-designee Jim Jordan, who, I mean, really, just stop calling him that, right? He's not going to be Speaker, currently has the votes to win over the Speaker's gavel. That is to say, okay, nobody actually has them. The abrupt about-face on the McHenry resolution, after momentum behind it had grown steadily for days, leaves the GOP in yet another dead-end rut. Some Jordan allies suggested that he could force a third ballot on the floor, though multiple Republican lawmakers have warned that his opposition will only grow on another vote. Talks are ongoing about a potential alternative approach that could accomplish the same goal as the resolution from Representative David Joyce, Republican of Ohio, but Republicans are warning that, or against, bringing anything to the floor unless it has a majority of the conference in support. Well, okay, I guess, although, you know, a majority of the conference doesn't pass anything either. What you really should be saying is we're not going to bring anything to the floor unless it has 217 members of the conference in support. The language that was being floated is dead, mostly dead, said Representative Kelly Armstrong of North Dakota, a Jordan ally. This can't be one of those deals where we have Republicans voting no and hoping yes. It just can't be, so we better have some resolve in how we're doing it. Joyce insisted he is not entirely pivoting away from his plan. He pointed to pockets of the GOP conference that remain adamant about being able to move legislation on the floor in the coming days and weeks. I didn't hear it was dead. I think there are some of these folks out in there who wish it was dead. But I think the overwhelming majority of the people in there agree that we can't continue down in this paralysis when the world is on fire, Joyce said. Conservatives in particular praised Jordan's decision not to pursue the idea of empowering McHenry, an idea that had emerged from the GOP's more centrist wing. I think it's a good thing. The House of Representatives needs a speaker, not a speaker light. It doesn't really need a speaker anyway. I don't support using temporary powers for Mr. McHenry. Representative Matt Gaetz, remember that guy, said. Okay, and now I know that there's also been some objection to the idea of a temporary speaker from other quarters. And I don't think the Democrats are particularly happy with the idea either, even if the power is limited, because they view it as allowing McCarthy, or not McCarthy, but Jordan this time, to hit the pause button and try and whip his conference without further embarrassing failed votes. And I don't know if they want to empower that or not. And I don't know whether there are probably some Republicans who are opposed to Jordan who likewise have that fear, although perhaps they might be more interested in allowing the House to function and saying that's more important than preventing Jordan from being able to rally his troops out of the public eye. Anyway, so that's, I think, where things stand, although I don't have information on when they might hold their next vote on the floor. but I guess people aren't looking forward to it because it's become a very unpleasant situation. We did mention yesterday that Jordan and his forces, surprisingly, given that they are both insurrectionists and that he is most famous or most infamous for looking the other way when people were sexually assaulting the wrestlers under his care. Believe it or not, just like Elise Stefanik, and no one could believe that she brought up his wrestling career in the nominating speech that she gave for him on the floor, no one can believe now that Jim Jordan has decided to go with threats of sexual molestation against other members of Congress and their families as a strategy to get them to get on board the Jordan train. But I guess you go with what you know. Yeah, that's what's happening. Of course, people, supporters of Jordan, whoever they may be, are apparently calling the families at home of the holdout votes against him and threatening them with all sorts of fun activities like murder, death, rape, etc. And although it seems like they've been trained partially, maybe by their days in the Trump gang, they have this strange idea that if you call and make a death threat against somebody, but then throw in the end, but I mean non-violently, then you won't be prosecuted. You can just point to that and say, well, I called and said I'm going to murder you and tear you to pieces, but non-violently. And, that's usually doesn't work for getting you off the hook. Anyway, Mediaite has as this is the headline for their story. I guess they really want to grab the eyes with this one. Part of those threats, which, we'll have to adjust for reading on the air a little bit. I need my censoring horn on hand for this. Let's say we can always say, just abbreviate it with one letter and you'll know what letter, what word we mean. You're going to be effing molested. That's okay. So we could have gone with it. You're going to be molested, but that just leads a weird comedic element to it that not intentional, but you're going to be effing molested. It's a weird threat too. CNN airs shocking voicemail to GOP lawmaker's wife from Jim Jordan supporter. Yes, that's apparently what you do with yourself if you're a Jim Jordan supporter. You call and leave these messages. Jennifer Bowers Bahney, maybe Bahney, not sure how she pronounces that. Writing for Mediaite, a shocking voicemail obtained by CNN demonstrated the level of vitriol being leveled at some Republican lawmakers and their families as Jim Jordan continued to push for the House speakership. Jake Tapper played the message sent to the wife of an unnamed GOP congressman opposing Jordan after cautioning, "This is pretty ugly stuff." The call began, "Why is your husband such a pig?" and only got worse from there. And here's a large block quote from it. So, would you like to be threatened? This is what it's like, I guess, to be threatened by. So, obviously, the threats apparently not working very well, and people are going public with it, as we heard yesterday when Greg was reporting on it. And I imagine it's just losing him votes, and people are digging in their heels. And you got to imagine that, you can't stop now, right? You're on the record opposing Jordan. They hate you. They're leveling threats at you. You can't then go, well, all right, I don't want all these terrible things to happen to my family, so I'll give in and vote for Jordan, because he'll just make your life miserable for the rest of your career and carry out not these threats, I hope, but, make things. He'll certainly make your life miserable as long as you stay there in Congress. I would imagine. So it seems to me like this should solidify the opposition. So let's see. First, they start off with, "Why is your husband such a pig? Why would he get on TV and make an a-hole of himself?" I got to do some editing here. "Because he's a deep state prick." That's just kind of funny. You want to curse at the guy and then throw in deep state. Okay. Because he doesn't represent the people. So what we're going to do is I imagine there's a 2 in here. "We're going to effing follow you all over the place. we're going to be up your ass. I mean, I guess you can go ahead and say that. Effing nonstop. This clearly is a diplomat, someone from the State Department. We are now Antifa. I like that. All the terrible things we're going to do, we're Antifa, who doesn't do these terrible things. But we either imagine or fantasize that they do. We're going to do what the left does. You mean complain and worry? Wow, look out. We're going to do what the left does because your effing other F word that's, we don't have another, code for it, but this would be a homophobic slur. Because your effing other F word of a husband gets on TV, oh, the bad guys, they did stuff. I need to vote for Kevin McCarthy, a piece of S who everybody knows. I don't even know what this guy is saying. And for this piece of S ass to talk about Americans who are actually fighting for Americans as the bad people says everything about him. So F you, F your husband, and we're not like the left. Oh, now they're not like the left. Shoot, now I don't know what they're doing. We aren't violent. But we're going to follow your ass to every appointment you have, everything you effing do. Your husband's an a-hole. It goes on for some time. I mean, I shouldn't be laughing about it because it's a fairly dire threat. But, you know, it comes across as so crazed and spittle-flecked. And there's a lot of it, too. I'm going to have to read some of it to myself, I guess, during the break. I mean, I don't know. It seems kind of upsetting, so maybe I wanted to stop here. But anyway, I mean, I guess it's not very persuasive, as it turns out. Let's see. There's a little bit more here. You want to do it over the music? Your husband's an a-hole. You should effing talk to his stupid ass. We're at war. Israelis being killed. Oh, I'm sure they were very happy about having all that invoked on their name. And your dumb husband is acting like an effing 2-year-old. Oh, it's the husband acting like an effing 2-year-old. I get it. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I got the thumbs up from Darwin, who says, as our senior Haitian correspondent, that the pronunciation on Praz was just fine. Perfect. So we'll stick with it, and maybe we'll check in on that story at some point too. But so I read over the rest of the threatening message, and I guess it gets even dumber and more addled. But because it's been 2 minutes since we were reading the first part, I just wanted to remind you. Let's see. First of all, he's accused of being a pig, then accused of being a deep state prick. Then they're going to follow you all over the place, but remember, non-violently. And we're going to do what the left does, right? We are now Antifa. We're going to do what the left does, but non-violently, because we're not violent. We're not like the left. And we're going to follow you around. Your husband's an a-hole. Then, right, okay, you should talk. We're at war. Israelis being killed, and your dumb husband is acting like an effing 2-year-old. No wonder. He's a effing warmongering piece of S. So, he's not allowing us to help with the war, so he's a warmonger. And we're like the left. We're violent, except not violent, so we're not like the left. And that, what? And then, so listen, you're going to keep getting calls and emails. I'm putting all your information over the internet now. Everybody else is, and you will not be left alone because of your effing other F word husband, Jim Jordan, or more conservative, or you're going to be, that's an interesting message too, right? Okay, we'll get to the threat in a minute, but so basically they're saying, we will threaten you and follow you and harass you and molest you unless your husband votes for Jim Jordan or someone more conservative. It would be okay if that was it. It doesn't have to be Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan or more conservative, or you're going to be effing molested like you can never imagine. And again, non-violently. That's the quote. You're going to be effing molested like you can't ever imagine. And again, non-violently, because they are going to be violent, like the left, except they're not the left, but they are the left, because they're not violent, but they are violent. You won't go to the beauty parlor. Ooh. You must be a bitch to marry an effing ugly MFer like that. That's the powerful conclusion of Ken Burns's Civil War II. I mean, okay. It was never going to be coherent, but okay, so that's pretty bad. Tapper comes back afterwards and says, that is disgusting. And he's right. The pressure campaign for Jordan was announced over the weekend. Calls like that started happening immediately. Jordan didn't denounce it until last night. What's going on in your party? He asked Representative Mike McCall of Texas. Well, this shows you the level of political discourse in this country now, McCall began before Tapper interrupted. No, in your party, sir, in your party, Tapper said. That's good. McCall went on to call the tactics despicable and added, if this is the level of my party, I think it's in the gutter and we need to get out of the gutter right now. Okay. Well, at least it was put to him directly. That's good. And he responded to it too. He could have tried dodging again and saying, well, yeah, but really it's the Democrats' fault somehow. And they do that all the time anyway. So it's pretty amazing. To say the least, and of course, incoherent, but, you should expect that only crazy people would make these phone calls. And what a coincidence that Jim Jordan supporters would be interested in that kind of violence and intimidation. They were right to call him an insurrectionist, and, that was just factually true about it, and this just helps bear that out, and make it that much clearer that that's who we're talking about. Okay. Other news from yesterday. I missed it because, again, busy president and doing some other things, but President Biden made a primetime address to the nation from the Oval Office to discuss, all sorts of crises around the world, Israel, Ukraine, etc., and apparently made it for a very compelling speech. A lot of people in my social media timelines declaring it to be among the best they've heard. Which, of course, I assume means that it's high treason in the view of most Republicans and something, yada, yada. Everything he did was wrong. But apparently drawing some very interesting parallels and insisting, for instance, I could read you some of the quick coverage from last night. The Hill's coverage, just because it's most readily at hand, though, of course, the speech was covered everywhere. I'll give you the headline at the very least. Biden draws parallels between Putin and Hamas in Oval Office address. I guess basically the theme of it being that, it was very much based on American exceptionalism and the need for America as the essential country in the world, the one that is defending democracy wherever it's imperiled, but drawing an interesting parallel that we have an obligation to defend democracy and self-determination in Ukraine. Of course, the issue with making that a parallel with Israel is Well, they have voting, but not for everybody. So, it's a little more difficult of a sell with some, particularly with people who are more inclined to take the Palestinian point of view of these things. It's difficult to reconcile, defending democracy, which we also think of as having a freedom component, not just an electoral component, with the quasi-apartheid state in terms of Palestinian rights within Israeli held and Israeli occupied territory. It's difficult to reconcile those two concepts. Less difficult, though, is reconciling the idea that you have to stand up to military/terroristic aggression where it rears its head. And that was, I think, more favorably received. But that's the story. There's a couple of brief recaps out there available. Maybe you saw the address, be interested to hear what you had to say about it. But a lot of the usual coverage the next day, the 5 takeaways from the speech, etc. The Hill describes things this way, using the primetime Oval Office address to argue U.S. support for Israel and Ukraine in their respective wars is vital to American national security, drawing parallels between the two conflicts ahead of a request for congressional aid. Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to annihilate a neighboring democracy, Biden said, while adding that countries like Iran back both the U.S. designated terrorist group and the Kremlin. I know these conflicts can seem far away, and it's natural to ask, why does this matter to America? And it is a question some people have. The president sought to make the case that America is the essential nation that can simultaneously support its allies, deter adversaries, or adversaries as I like to say, and rally other nations behind the cause of global democracies. American leadership is what holds the world together. Sounds pretty lofty, but it's a speech for Americans. America's alliances are what keep us safe, Biden said. American values are what make us a partner that other nations want to work with, except when Trump wields them. And to put all of that at risk if we walk away from Ukraine and turn our backs on Israel, it's just not worth it. So you get the sense of where he's going with this speech. I do wish I had seen it, and I'll have to kind of double back and take a look at parts of it on video. It was just terribly inconveniently timed for me. Yes, prime time actually sucks for me. You're not going to get me to the television at that hour for whatever reason. Okay, let's see. And by the way, yes, I have now had a report made available to me about what Justice was talking about yesterday during our intro to the show, saying that Murdery Trader Green would spin any peaceful protest in the Capitol as insurrection. So it was turns out it was protesters seeking to demanding a ceasefire in Israel, and generally approaching things, I think, from a more pro-Palestinian point of view, I guess. But there were mixed numbers there, and some who would claim that they were representing an Israeli point of view, but wanting a ceasefire. Unlikely to happen, but a sit-in and shouting protest in the Capitol Rotunda, people being dragged away and arrested because you're not allowed to do that in there. But sure enough, Murdery Trader Green wanted to know why all of those people weren't being slapped in irons and sent to the gulag, because that's what happened to the January 6th protesters, and it's just the same thing. And of course, it is not. If you get picked up and dragged away by the police and you don't help them drag you, that's a lot different from bashing them over the head with a fire extinguisher and smearing feces on the wall. Isn't it? But apparently not in Murdery Trader Green's mind. Okay, let's see. A couple other very interesting developments here. Oh, I got to see if I can find some more reporting on some of this stuff. But as Greg was leaving yesterday, he broke the news for us that Sidney Powell had reached a plea deal in her Trump-related case, criminal case in Fulton County, Georgia. So if we can, we'll turn to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for coverage on that. Sidney Powell reaches plea deal in Trump case. Noted conspiracy theorist pleads guilty and agrees to testify for the prosecution. I'm sure it's valuable, but again, I have to stress that she's widely considered by both the prosecution and the defense to be a stark raving lunatic. And I really don't know how much help her cooperation is going to be. And like Trump, everything she touches dies. So I'm a little concerned about that. But I think they'll deal with it. But I think they may find that her cooperation is somewhat to completely less valuable than they thought. And they'll, in the end, wish that they had just sent her to prison instead. But we'll wait and find out. David Wickert, Tamar Hallerman, and Chris Joyner are on the piece here. Attorney Sidney Powell, who pushed false conspiracy theories, alleging widespread fraud in the 2020 election, and that's putting it mildly, reached a plea deal with Fulton County prosecutors on Thursday, a day before jury selection was set to begin for her criminal trial. During an appearance in Fulton County Superior Court, Powell pleaded guilty to 6 misdemeanor counts of conspiracy. To commit, conspiracy being to commit intentional interference with the performance of election duties. Why misdemeanors? I guess to get her on board, but gosh, that seems low. She had originally been charged with felony racketeering and 6 other felony conspiracy counts for her alleged role in breaching the voting system in rural Coffee County after the 2020 election. And I do think that there's some danger in charging breaking and entering at an elections office and stealing and tampering with the voting equipment and charging that as a misdemeanor. I think you're going to see a lot more of that happening and people wondering why I'm being charged with a felony and maybe getting away with it. I don't know. As part of the deal, Powell agreed to testify truthfully, wink, wink, in the case, and on Wednesday recorded a video statement with prosecutors. And I guess they still have to be satisfied that she's fulfilling her end of the bargain, or else they can rescind the plea agreement. But I'll tell you that, I have a feeling you'll see them rescinding the plea agreement at some point. I don't know that Sidney Powell has any idea what the truth is, right? Her agreement is she's supposed to testify truthfully. She's just incapable of doing it. I don't know. And even if she does do it, she's susceptible to, you play the wild accusations that she's making, even if they're true or believed to be true by the Fulton County prosecutors. The defense is just going to say, yeah, well, the problem with listening to Sidney Powell about this is twofold. One, she was in on it from the beginning and mostly it was her idea. And two, she's nuts. She's crazy. Even we're on the record calling her crazy. You'll find evidence all over the place of Trump dismissing her as crazy. Now here she is. Oh, she's actually the one who can see things clearly and tell the truth? I don't think so. And I don't even think so. But okay, as part of the deal, she's supposed to testify truthfully. She made a video. That's exciting. She will receive 6 years probation and pay a $6,000 fine. I don't know if I like this idea very much. She also agreed to pay $2,700 in restitution to the Georgia Secretary of State's office to replace election equipment in Coffee County. Big whoop. And Powell wrote a letter of apology to the citizens of Georgia. I think she thinks she got the better of the deal there. It's a major development in a case that involves criminal charges against former President Donald Trump and 17 other defendants. They're accused, of course, of, treason. But no, not treason. Illegal scheme to overturn Biden's victory. Wink, wink. Somehow not treason. Powell's plea deal is a significant win for Fulton prosecutors. She can speak to closed-door Oval Office meetings that she had with Trump, Giuliani, and several other co-defendants. She also participated in a news conference of Trump's elite strike force of attorneys, where she laid out false claims that the Dominion voting system software used in Georgia had flipped votes from Trump to Biden. But now it's just a misdemeanor, so keep doing it, I guess. Powell also filed a series of unsuccessful lawsuits challenging the election results in Georgia and other states. And in December of 2020, she urged Trump to seize election machines and to appoint her as special counsel to investigate fraud. Can you imagine had that happened? Now the story of the data breach portion of things, which also is just a misdemeanor now, but whatever. It was Powell's alleged involvement in a plan to obtain voting system data from Coffee County that led to the criminal charges, but ended up not being criminal charges, but misdemeanor charges. Well, they're criminal too, I guess, but not felony. On January 7th, 2021, what was going on those days? Computer analysts from an Atlanta tech firm visited the Coffee County election office and stole data, including ballot images, voting equipment software, and personal voter information, according to the Fulton indictment. Court records show the tech firm kept Powell informed of its progress and billed her for the Coffee County operation. 3 others have also been charged in the incident, apparently an effort to prove Trump's false election fraud claims. Powell had denied participating in the data breach and said it wasn't illegal anyway. She said the Coffee County officials authorized the voting system preview because they were crazy too. Powell is the second defendant in the case to cut a plea deal with prosecutors. She joins bail bondsman Scott Hall, who was also involved in the Coffee County breach and agreed to cooperate last month. So what happens to Cheseboro, as we are now calling him? Powell's plea deal ups the pressure on co-defendant Kenneth Cheseboro, who was set to go on trial alongside her on Friday. He was charged for his role in Trump's plan to use Republican presidential electors, who weren't presidential electors, to help overturn Democrat Joe Biden's victory. On Thursday, Scott Grubman, one of Cheseboro's attorneys, said he had no comment at this time. If he also takes a plea, prosecutors would have the major benefit of not needing to publicly share the evidence they've collected at this relatively early point in the legal process. That helps them as they zero in on some of their biggest targets in the case, including Trump and Giuliani, who each face 13 charges. Otherwise, jury selection will begin today, Friday, in Fulton County, with Cheseboro as the lone defendant, which I'm sure he's happy about. He didn't want to be tried alongside crazy Sidney Powell. For Powell, who has been an ardent and outspoken supporter of conspiracy theories surrounding the 2020 election and beyond, the guilty pleas mark a major turnabout. Under the terms of the deal, if she completes probation without incident, she will have a clean criminal record, which she shouldn't. It's also possible she can keep her law license. What are we doing? During Thursday's proceedings, prosecutors specifically said Powell's crimes were not of moral turpitude. According to the rules of the State Bar of Texas, where Powell practices, a licensed attorney cannot commit a serious crime or commit any other criminal act that reflects adversely on the lawyer's honesty, trustworthiness, or fitness as a lawyer in other respects. Well, she did. However, serious crime is defined as any felony involving moral turpitude, any misdemeanor involving theft, embezzlement, or fraudulent or reckless misappropriation of money or other property, or any attempt, conspiracy, or solicitation of another to commit any of the foregoing crimes. There are other ways an attorney could come under disciplinary scrutiny in Texas, including conduct that obstructs justice, or behavior involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. I mean, she said Italian military satellites had hacked the system, that Hugo Chavez had programmed Dominion voting systems. And then broke into the Coffee County elections office to steal the equipment, or sent people to do it on her behalf so that she could prove her crazy conspiracy theories were true, and they were not. I mean, she's not. This all involves dishonesty, fraud, deceit, and misrepresentation. Claire Reynolds, spokeswoman for the State Bar of Texas's Office of the Chief Disciplinary Counsel, said the dismissal of an earlier disciplinary case against Powell had been appealed and the parties are awaiting a decision. Powell's guilty plea in Georgia is a separate matter, she said. The Texas case involves alleged misrepresentations in lawsuits she filed after the 2020 presidential election. At this time, I do not know if her guilty plea in Georgia will result in a separate disciplinary matter here in Texas, she said. Pending attorney discipline cases in Texas are confidential, so she wouldn't be saying anything more about it. So there you go. I don't know if I love this idea, but they better land one of these big fish. That's all I can say. Because I have a feeling that she might actually end up getting in the way of their being able to do so. Because she's nuts and respects nothing. All right, let's see. Speaking of this, and now we should see whether there is any news coverage of the story that I can read, because all I have is the headline and a firewalled story from Smart News, who is borrowing it from the Detroit News, but the Detroit News has it paywalled. But the headline here reads that the Michigan AG, Dana Nessel, is dropping charges against one of the fake Trump electors who had been charged in an alleged cooperation deal of some kind here. Let me see if there's any news being reported about it. We'll look for Dana Nessel and elector and drop charges and see what comes up in the news searches. Yesterday I couldn't bring anything, but here we go. Now there's some NBC News. Oh, everybody's got it. NBC, CBS, CNN. Who are we going to go with on this one? Let's try CBS today, just a sample. CBS Detroit, Michigan AG drops charges against false elector after reaching cooperation deal. So it's happening everywhere. We'll see whether this one is any less troublesome than Sidney Powell's. A Michigan Republican accused of participating in a fake elector plot had all criminal charges dropped Thursday after he and the state attorney general's office reached a cooperation deal. The defendant here is James Renner, one of 16 Republicans who investigators say met following the 2020 presidential election and signed a document falsely stating that they were the state's duly elected and qualified electors. Michigan was one of 7 states where supporters of then-President Donald Trump signed certificates that falsely stated he won their states. President Joe Biden won Michigan by nearly 155,000 votes, a result confirmed by a GOP-led state Senate investigation in 2021. In July, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel announced that each of the 16 would face 8 criminal charges, including multiple counts of forgery. All 16 had pleaded not guilty, but on Thursday, the Attorney General's office announced during a court hearing in Ingham County that it would be dropping its case against Renner, 77, based on an agreement between the parties. Renner's lawyer, Clint Westbrook, said in court that he and his client welcomed the result. Of course they did. Westbrook did not immediately return a phone call seeking further comment. In a statement, the state attorney general's office said they dismissed the case, the Renner case, it says again, Renner case, under a cooperation agreement, but did not elaborate on the deal. The drop charges come after Nessel, a Democrat, told a liberal group during a virtual event that the false electors had been brainwashed and believed Trump won in Michigan. A motion to dismiss charges against 2 defendants was thrown out by an Ingham County District Court judge earlier this month. So that's interesting. I'd like to know more about what kind of cooperation they're going to get, but I guess that's going to be held in confidence until later. But all right, things are moving. People are finding charges being dropped against them in exchange for cooperation. And interesting to find out that the AG is willing to believe that they just truly believed that he had won and they had been brainwashed. But, you know, if they'll testify to that and can you point out for the court who brainwashed you, and they're willing to point to the orange guy, then I guess that might be worth something. All right. Well, just wanted to, keep track of that development, so that, we could share it with you and, watch as things percolate and these cases move to trial. Okay. Let's see, just a few minutes left here before the top of the hour break. Well, we'll read a little bit more about this by taking a look at this MSNBC piece by Joyce Vance, the Fulton County question that should keep Trump up at night, I guess about the Sidney Powell thing. She sees it as something better than I do. Sidney Powell's the second Trump co-defendant to take a plea deal. She may not be the last. The second in Fulton County anyway. It's a bail bondsman guy, right? So let's see. All right. The basics of the case are pretty much the same still. getting it reduced to misdemeanor. One of the questions that should be keeping former President Donald Trump up at night is who among his co-defendants in Georgia will flip and testify against him. So far, only one of Trump's 18 co-defendants has pled guilty. That was yesterday. Now there are two, Scott Hall and Sidney Powell. Scott Hall, by the way, not just a bail bondsman. His brother-in-law was Trump's deputy campaign manager in 2016. That seems like it should be mentioned more prominently. To date, Hall is the only Trump co-defendant whose plea deal and cooperation agreement with prosecutors is public. Now we have a second one. There could be more coming. Indeed, Sidney Powell joined him yesterday. Reporting from earlier in October confirms that Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis offered cooperation agreements to an unspecified number of other co-defendants in the case, all of whom will have to decide whether a deal like the one Hall received is a better option than going to trial. There are only so many sweetheart deals to go around. Prosecutors' need for witnesses on any given point is limited, and typically those defendants who are first in get the best deals. With their trial slated to begin on October 23rd, Sidney Powell and Kenneth Cheseboro faced this decision with some urgency. We know what she did about it. One of the prosecutors on Willis's team told Judge Scott McAfee that the prosecution was potentially willing to offer deals to both of them. Hall's deal is very good, meaning he must be giving prosecutors something very good in return. For example, he may have to testify against a co-defendant, and Powell is the most likely target. They were both charged in connection with the alleged plot to access the voting machines in Coffee County. Does Powell want to risk a sentence of 5 to 20 years in a Georgia state prison? Or might she decide it's time to cut her losses and testify to what she knows about Trump? Prosecutors usually start their deal-making with the least culpable participants in a conspiracy. They flip these smaller fish in exchange for helping make a case against the person above them until they reach the person or people at the top. The highest value co-defendants can provide prosecutors with unique access to the people in charge of criminal conspiracies. Powell and Cheseboro were literally in the proverbial room, or rooms, when it happened. Powell, for instance, attended the contentious December 18th, 2020 Oval Office meeting, when it was suggested she be appointed a special prosecutor to investigate election fraud. Cheseboro authored the original plan for the fake electors scheme. So, they're both good targets. That's certainly true. Their testimony, if they were willing to be truthful and proved credible, and that's a big if, could be a real asset for prosecutors. Presumably, in this case, Willis and her team are not counting on any such deals. Oh, well, I guess they are now. With stakes this high, these prosecutors would have to believe their case against Trump was already airtight when they indicted it, but jurors like to hear from witnesses with first-hand knowledge who can explain what happened and how it happened. All true. Defense lawyers can attempt to undermine the credibility of them, of course, especially when it has been traded for favorable treatment. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. I want to continue on with this piece here if I can. But first, I've had an offer, a generous offer I cannot refuse. I dare not. From Darwin, the story that I mentioned earlier, and if I have it right, Matthew Rigdon brought us the Pras Michel story and said weird follow-up, and I don't know that we're going to be able to get to it because there's too many other weird follow-ups to do. But actually, Darwin said, if you send it to me, I'd like to read it for the show. So that would be an excellent. What a great collaboration between listeners to get that story on the air, if we could make that happen. And I don't have any reason to doubt that will happen. So, awesome. All right, well, I just sent that off to Darwin, so maybe we can squeeze that into the show in the near future without my having to be the one to read it. But, all right, back to the Joyce Vance piece. I think it goes on at some length here, but I think it makes a couple of extra points that might be worth considering, especially it being a Friday. So as you know, defense lawyers can attempt to undermine the credibility of cooperating co-defendants' testimony, especially where it has been traded for favorable treatment. But prosecutors have a ready response. The fact that these witnesses aren't altar boys is more a reflection on the defendant than the witnesses and the government. The defendant chose the witnesses. These are the people that he surrounded himself with. So that's of some interest, I suppose. If we're dismissing her as a crackpot, we could say, you had her in the Oval Office and were considering appointing her special prosecutor and embedding her in the Biden government in an attempt to prove her stupid, crazy theories. This is on you, not us. And of course, prosecutors have to carefully corroborate testimony from defendants turned cooperators with documents, cell phone records, texts, emails, additional witnesses, and other evidence. The deal that a cooperating co-defendant gets is contingent on their truthfulness, and prosecutors usually walk through that deal with the witnesses during the direct examination so that everything is clear to the jury before cross-examination. The witness knows that if they lie, the deal is off. Deceitful cooperators get exposed. The one person in the courtroom who is sure to know if they are lying is the defendant who is on trial and who can tip off their attorney ahead of cross-examination. The risk of the cooperator of losing their deal and ending up worse off is not an empty threat, I hope. And prosecutors use this fact when they talk with juries about evaluating the testimony they've heard from the now cooperating witness. Consider the congressional testimony of Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, or Mark Meadows' aide, Cassidy Hutchinson. They are textbook examples of witnesses who have been able to change their stories without losing their credibility. While most of the Fulton County defendants are keeping their own counsel for the moment, some have publicly rejected the notion that they could plead guilty. Lawyers for Michael Roman, Trump's 2020 Director of Election Day Operations, seems to have overreached, demanding prosecutors dismiss all charges against their client in exchange for his testimony. His lawyers have since told reporters there is no deal. John Eastman's lawyer explicitly said Eastman is not going to make a deal. He's not going to offer to lie about somebody else in order to get out of trouble. But I've seen co-defendants say these kinds of things before, sometimes right up until the moment they walk into court to change their plea to guilty. With the first trial in Fulton County just around the corner, there are likely a number of people deciding whether the moment has come to plead and cooperate. And again, this was written just before Sidney Powell did just that. So she was 100% right there. A recent study concluded that cooperation agreements fail for two main reasons. Defendants who are unable to provide information that helps the case in a significant way, and defendants who are caught lying to prosecutors. Apparently, Scott Hall was able to convince prosecutors his information was both truthful and valuable, and it's unlikely he'll be the last co-defendant in Georgia to decide the government can prove its case against them and look to prosecutors for a way out, but the clock is ticking. And I guess Sidney Powell heard it. So that's the context in which the news of her plea agreement ought to be considered. All right, let's see. Time now, I think, in the second hour of the show, to cast our eye further afield. There are definitely some very strange stories floating out around there that need to be shared. And the latest one comes to us through Business Insider. The very bizarre premise of this story here. And it's an exclusive. That's how bizarre it is. Not only is it bizarre in its own right, but they decided that Business Insider would be the only place that should get this story. I think more people are going to be investigating it soon. But for now, an exclusive. Tech billionaire Peter Thiel. His name comes up quite frequently as a right-wing weirdo and conspiracy theorist. Peter Thiel was an FBI informant. How do you like that? That seems surprising. What's the story here? Matthias Schwartz has the story for Business Insider. Peter Thiel has worn many hats over the years. It's not a story about hats, though. Silicon Valley founder, Trump mega donor, cryptocurrency booster, democracy skeptic. I didn't even realize that was a hat. But okay, he is one. We know that much. But there is yet another facet to Thiel, one that has remained secret until now. FBI informant. Not only is it surprising to find out that that's the case, but it's surprising to find out how we found out that this is the case. I think they'll explain it later on, but I've seen it. Maybe you have too. In the summer of 2021, Insider has learned, Thiel began providing information as a confidential human source, or CHS, to Jonathan Buma, B-U-M-A, Buma, I don't know how he pronounces that, Buma, I guess, right? A Los Angeles-based FBI agent who specializes in investigating political corruption and foreign influence campaigns. I didn't realize there was a market for that, such that you would have an office for it in L.A., but I guess it can happen anywhere. Charles Johnson, a longtime associate of Thiel's and a notorious figure in the far-right movement that Thiel has subsidized for a decade, the movement, I don't know if he's subsidized Charles Johnson directly, told Insider in a statement that he helped recruit the billionaire as an informant by introducing him to Buma. So Charles Johnson is, an associate of Thiel's, notorious right-wing figure. You remember him as the Rage Furby. I think that was the other Charles Johnson's a term for him that really stuck. There's two Charles Johnsons on both sides of this exchange. One who is the author of the old Little Green Footballs blog, who was an interesting figure in his own right, a right-leaning figure post 9/11 era, and then more recently, much more liberal-leaning. And certainly anti-Trump, and but he found the evolution of the right wing just too loathsome to stand by. But he does have that weird background himself. But Charles Johnson, Chuck Johnson, the red-headed Rage Furby, the one who was most infamously known for, I guess, during his college Republican days, trying to convince everybody that he was, I guess, too wildly insane to engage physically, that he would fight you like a maniac by, as the reports have it, defecating on the dorm room floor just to convince everybody of how crazy he was, although why that's supposed to make you dangerous inherently, I do not know, but maybe I have the story wrong, but it certainly involved defecating in the dorm room floors. Anyway, this lunatic, who has been of considerably less influence in the later years, and overshadowed by other lunatics from MAGA, apparently set this whole thing up. A source with knowledge of Thiel's relationship to the FBI, whose identity is known to Insider, but who insisted on anonymity, corroborated Johnson's account, telling Insider that Johnson brokered a relationship between Thiel and Buma. Insider was able to confirm through an additional source that the FBI added Thiel to its formal roster of registered informants. I didn't even know they had one. Another source close to Thiel told Insider that while they could not confirm that Thiel was a CHS, Thiel did speak to Buma occasionally. The source said that any assistance Thiel might have provided to the FBI should be understood as part of Thiel's gradual distancing of himself from Trump and the broader MAGA movement, which has vigorously criticized the FBI and other federal law enforcement agencies. Well, I'm sure that's how they want it seen anyway. The FBI maintains a vast network of informants to keep tabs on organized crime, terrorist threats, extremist groups, and other criminal and intelligence targets. These sources, according to the Bureau's Confidential Human Source Policy Guide, are more than casual tipsters. Confidential human sources enter, quote, into a relationship with the FBI, and that relationship will forever affect the life of that individual, the guide says. They will be either an FBI source or a former FBI source, and in turn, his or her conduct or misconduct will reflect upon the FBI. As such, the process for recruiting and maintaining such sources is highly regulated, requiring multiple layers of approval. Only people who are able to provide valuable information on a recurring basis are granted CHS status, according to the policy. As a CHS, Thiel was assigned a code name and an internal serial number to track his reporting. The information he passed on about foreign contacts and Silicon Valley intrigue was reviewed and validated, or cross-checked, against other sources by his case agents and their colleagues. Thiel did not respond to multiple requests for comment. A Thiel spokesperson stopped responding to inquiries after being told that Insider was reporting on Thiel's relationship with the FBI. The FBI's National Press Office and Scott Horton, an attorney who represents Jonathan Booma, both declined to comment. Scott Horton sounds familiar to me. Let's see. No reporting, it says, though, on political ties is the next section. Thiel is a citizen of Germany, the United States, and New Zealand. As of last year, he was reportedly in the process of acquiring yet another passport from Malta. That sounds totally unsuspicious. In 2016, he donated $1.25 million to Trump's campaign and endorsed him from the stage at the Republican National Convention. After Trump won, Thiel served on his transition team. Johnson, who said that he was also an informant for Booma, told Insider that he believes that Thiel's reporting to the FBI was largely limited to foreign contacts and attempts by foreign governments to penetrate Silicon Valley. Hence the L.A. base there, I guess. Thiel has publicly called on the FBI to investigate Google's ties to the Chinese government, but that would also be an enormous business help to him, I think. Thiel, Johnson said, was directed by the FBI not to report on his interactions with Donald Trump or other U.S. political figures. I would like to hear some more about that, actually. Many of the politicians that Thiel has bankrolled, including Trump, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, and Blake Masters, a former Arizona senatorial candidate, have repeatedly attacked the Bureau and its leadership in public. In 2022, Vance, whose campaign and affiliated PACs received a total of $15 million from Thiel, falsely claimed that the FBI had illegally wiretapped Trump's phone. Vance accused the Bureau of harassing faithful Christians and pledged to block all of Joe Biden's Department of Justice nominees in retaliation for the Trump prosecutions. Most, but not all, of Thiel's donations occurred in early 2021, before the launch of Vance's campaign and the many false claims that he has made over the course of the race. Masters, whose campaign received $20 million of support from Thiel, has endorsed the false conspiracy theory that undercover FBI agents fomented the January 6th insurrection and accused the FBI agents who executed a search warrant on Mar-a-Lago of going after President Trump because they hate him. As with Vance, most but not all of Thiel's donations to Masters occurred before Masters made his most inflammatory and baseless statements during the later stages of his campaign. Thiel is reportedly planning to sit on the sidelines of the 2024 elections. Neither Trump, Masters, nor Vance responded to requests for comment. Next up, doing business with the FBI. Some of Thiel's business interests rely on the FBI and other government agencies as potential revenue sources. He retains a 10% stake in Palantir, a data company that has sold more than $1 billion of software and related services to the federal government, including the Pentagon, the CIA, the National Security Agency, and the FBI. A $250 million contract with the U.S. Army in September adds to the evidence that Palantir is essentially a government service provider, a financial analyst said. Thiel also backed Bold End, a spyware company marketing itself as an American competitor to the Israeli NSO group, Forbes reported last year. NSO's products have been bought and tested by the FBI. Mithril Capital, another entity Thiel co-founded because he loves Lord of the Rings crap, was reportedly a subject of FBI interest in 2019, although nothing appears to have come of the inquiry. Mithril's co-founder did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The FBI did not respond to questions regarding the Mithril matter. Johnson, who revealed Thiel's FBI ties, is a tech investor and far-right agitator with long-standing ties to both Thiel and the network of MAGA political operators surrounding Trump. He claims to have had a hand in co-founding Clearview, a facial recognition startup, and Traitwell, a genomics company. According to Forbes, he worked with Thiel to help vet and select senior staffers for the Trump transition in 2017. By the way, it should drive you absolutely insane that Charles Johnson has a successful career as anything, much less as an investor and political advisor. Johnson claimed to be an FBI informant himself in a lawsuit that he filed against Clearview's founders. He told Insider he recruited Thiel to serve as a CHS and introduced him to Bouma, the FBI special agent who was Johnson's handler. It's unclear whether Thiel remains a CHS for the FBI, although they said in the beginning that one of the major defining traits of being a CHS is you're always a CHS. Johnson told Insider that he believes that the relationship has been severed, but declined to offer details. Bouma wrote in his statement to the Senate Judiciary Committee that he was ordered to cease contact with all of his sources in late 2022. I wonder why that was the case. Johnson's ties to Trump and Thiel are well documented, but he is also a self-identified troll with a history of spreading false information and smearing his rivals. In this instance, his claims are corroborated by two additional sources, as well as supported in part by a third who says Thiel and Bouma spoke occasionally. Next up, join up or get crushed. Bouma came forward in August as a whistleblower, alleging that the FBI under Trump and Attorney General Bill Barr shut down his efforts to determine whether Rudy Giuliani had been compromised by a Russian asset. Insider was the first news organization to report on his claims. In a statement prepared for the Senate Judiciary Committee, Bouma said that FBI headquarters had closed his most valuable human sources, including one codenamed Genius. I don't know if that's a dumb code name or a good one, who had reported on far-right figures involved with planning the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Johnson told Insider that Genius was his CHS code name. Oh, boy. Insider was able to confirm Johnson's identity as Genius, God, that's sad, with two additional sources. The statement does not mention Thiel. That's going to make Thiel angry that his code name wasn't Super Genius. Wow, what a disturbing turn of events. In a written statement to Insider, Johnson said he was stepping forward as a CHS to support Bouma's efforts as a whistleblower to bring about what Bouma believes to be necessary reforms in how the FBI handles informants. Johnson said that he was exposing Thiel's work as a CHS as retribution for what Johnson perceives to be bad decision-making by the Founders Fund, Thiel's venture capital firm. So in other words, I guess he went to Thiel for money for a startup for one of his stupid ideas, and they said no, so he revealed that Peter Thiel is a confidential human source to the FBI, although that's of limited value because so is he. And I don't understand whether, I don't know whether now can I believe any of this is true? Johnson also told Insider he felt betrayed that Thiel did not invest in Johnson's own startups, which he had expected Thiel to do in exchange for introducing him to Bouma. Why? Johnson said that he told Thiel that by offering the FBI a window into his contacts with foreign governments, he could demonstrate his loyalty to the United States. He described Thiel's motivation for working with Bouma as a kind of hedge in an environment where extravagant wealth no longer affords the safety it used to. Boo-hoo. He pointed to ProPublica's reporting on Thiel's income tax avoidance and the death of Jeffrey Epstein, who had reportedly scheduled several meetings with Thiel. I told him, join up or get crushed, Johnson said. How can Johnson be thriving in this environment? This is crazy. The FBI's recruitment of Thiel as a CHS puts him among the Bureau's most prominent assets, but he is not alone among right-wing figures who have collaborated with the Bureau. Trump himself offered to help the FBI fight organized crime in Atlantic City in the early 1980s. Maybe. Truth Social, the Trump-owned social media company, has quietly tipped the FBI off to users who threaten violence, even as it seeks to cash in on their anger. At least two of the rioters who showed up to storm the Capitol on January 6th were also FBI informants, as was Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boys leader, who was sentenced to 22 years in prison for seditious conspiracy and other felonies stemming from the Capitol breach. Tarrio reportedly served as a source for federal and local law enforcement, assisting with the prosecution of more than a dozen people. There are some weird cross currents, to be sure, in this story, and I hope at least one of them sucks Charles Johnson under and drowns him in a river of his own excrement. It doesn't have to be his. It could be other people's. I wouldn't mind. Okay, so that was unexpected, to say the least, and a good Friday view of things. Something I didn't expect to be exploring today or any other day. But like I said, if it was going to be explored, it was going to be done on a Friday. All right. There are like 15 other really interesting directions that we ought to be going in this and the next segment. But maybe, do we want to save which one for the long segment? I'm not really sure, but there's an awful lot that we can share. Let's see what might fit in the minutes remaining before this next break. How about this one? I guess maybe because we're talking about confidential informants, maybe this fits. Is this a good segue? I think Scott sent me this one. A Cory Doctorow piece in The Intercept that looks like it will be of some interest. So let's get this. Can I get this pop-up out of the way? Is there any way I can do that? No? All right. Well, we might have to read it from Pocket. But The Intercept piece by Cory Doctorow. Why Big Tech, Cops, and Spies Were Made for One Another. He usually has good insight on this stuff. Let's take a look at this. This maybe is this excerpted from his book, The Internet Con, How to Seize the Means of Computation. A intriguing title. Let's see. The techlash has finally reached the courts, he says. Amazon's in court. Google's in court. Apple's under EU investigation. The French authorities just kicked down NVIDIA's doors and went through their files looking for evidence of crimes against competition. People are pissed at tech about moderation, about monopolization, about price gouging, about labor abuses, and everywhere and always about privacy. From experience, I can tell you that Silicon Valley techies are pretty sanguine about commercial surveillance. Why should I care if Google wants to show me better ads? But they are much less cool about government spying. The NSA, those are the losers who weren't smart enough to get an interview at Google. That's an interesting view of things. And likewise, from experience, I can tell you that the government employees and contractors are pretty cool with state surveillance. Why would I worry about the NSA spying on me? I already gave the Office of Personnel Management a comprehensive dossier of all possible compromat in my past when I got my security clearance. But they are far less cool with commercial surveillance. Google, those creeps would sell their mothers for a nickel. To the Chinese. Okay, so similar concerns on both sides about the other. What are they both missing? That American surveillance is a public-private partnership, a symbiosis between a concentrated tech sector that has the means, motive, and opportunity to spy on every person in the world, and a state that loves surveillance as much as it hates checks and balances. Big tech, cops, and surveillance agencies were made for one another. How so? We begin with the privacy deficit. America has a privacy law deficit. While U.S. trading rivals like the EU and even China have enacted muscular privacy laws in response to digital commercial surveillance, the U.S. has slept through a quarter century of increasing corporate spying without any federal legislative action. It's really something. America has stronger laws protecting you from video store clerks who gossip about your porn rentals than we do protecting you from digital spies who non-consensually follow you into an abortion clinic and then sell the data. In place of democratically accountable privacy laws, we have the imperial fiat of giant tech companies. Apple unilaterally decided that in-app surveillance should be limited to instances in which users explicitly opted in. Unsurprisingly, more than 96% of iOS users did not opt into surveillance. Presumably, the remaining 4% were either confused or Facebook employees or both. When Apple finally allowed its users to block Facebook surveillance, they cut off a torrent of valuable data that Facebook had non-consensually acquired from Apple device owners without those owners' permission. But, crucially, it was Apple that decided when consent was and wasn't needed to spy on its customers. After 96% of iOS device owners opted out of Facebook spying, Apple continued to spy on those users in precisely the same way that Facebook had, without telling them. And when they were caught doing it, they lied about it. Oh, I didn't realize that. Which raises a question. Why don't Apple customers simply block Apple's surveillance? Why don't they install software that prevents their devices from ratting them out to Apple? That's a good question. Well, you can't. I think because, of course, that would be illegal somehow. Very, very illegal. 1 in 4 web users has installed an ad blocker, which also blocks commercial surveillance. It's the biggest boycott in world history, is how he puts it here. And there's a quote, and it's a link to something. The reason you can modify your browser to ignore demands from servers to fetch ads and reveal facts about you in the process is that the web is an open platform. All the major browsers have robust interfaces for aftermarket blockers to plug into, and they're also open source.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio for our last segment of today's Anything Goes Friday. We were in the middle of Cory Doctorow's piece for The Intercept and explaining about, we were trying to explain why it is that Apple iOS users were so interested in, say, blocking Facebook's surveillance, but not particularly interested in blocking Apple's own surveillance of them. And apparently it ends up landing on the conclusion that it would somehow be very, very illegal for them to do so. And by way of explaining why that's the case, we have this fact, right? 1 in 4 web users has installed an ad blocker, and all the major browsers have robust interfaces for aftermarket blockers to plug into, and they're all open source, meaning that if a browser vendor restricts those interfaces in order to make it harder to block ads, other companies can, as they say here, fork the code to bypass those restrictions. Now, by contrast, apps are encrypted, which triggers a quarter-century-old law, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, whose Section 1201 makes it a felony to provide someone with a tool to bypass an access control for a copyrighted work. By encrypting apps and locking the keys away from the device owner, Apple can make it a crime for you to reconfigure your own phone to protect your privacy, with penalties of a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine for a first offense, considerably more than Sidney Powell now faces down in Georgia, apparently. Next up, the rise of big tech. An app is best understood as a web page wrapped in just enough IP, intellectual property, to make it a crime to install an ad blocker. That's an interesting definition of an app. A web page wrapped in just enough IP to make it a crime to install an ad blocker or anything else the app's shareholders disapprove of. DMCA Section 1201 is only one of a slew of laws that restrict the ability of technology users to modify the tools they own and use to favor their interests over manufacturers' interests. Laws governing cybersecurity, trademarks, patents, contracts, and other legal constructs can be woven together to block the normal activities that the tech giants themselves once pursued. Yes, there was a time when tech companies waged guerrilla warfare upon one another, reverse engineering, scraping, and hacking each other's products so that disgruntled users could switch from one service to another without incurring steep switching costs. For example, Facebook offered departing MySpace users a bot that would impersonate them to MySpace, scrape their inboxes, and import the messages to Facebook so users could maintain contact with friends they'd left behind on the older platform. That all changed as tech consolidated, shrinking the internet to what software developer Tom Eastman calls 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. This consolidation was not unique to tech. The 40-year drawdown of antitrust has led to mass consolidation across nearly every sector of the global economy, from bottle caps to banking. Tech companies merged, gobbled up hundreds of small startups, and burned billions of investor dollars offering products and services below cost, making it impossible for anyone else to get a foothold. Tech was the first industry born in the post-antitrust age. The Apple II Plus hit shelves the same year Ronald Reagan hit the campaign trail. When tech hit its first inter-industry squabble, jousting with the much more mature and concentrated entertainment industry during the Napster wars of the early 2000s, it was trounced, losing every court, regulatory, and legislative fight. By all rights, tech should have won those fights. After all, the tech sector in the go-go early internet years was massive, an order of magnitude larger than the entertainment companies challenging them in the halls of power, but big content was well established, having boiled itself down to 7 or so companies, depending on how you count, while tech was still a rabble of hundreds of small and medium-sized companies that couldn't agree on its legislative priorities. Tech couldn't even agree on the catering for a meeting where these priorities might be debated. Concentrated sectors find it comparatively easy to come to agreements, including agreements about what to tell Congress and federal judges. And since those concentrated sectors also find it easy to agree on whose turf belongs to whom, they are able to avoid the wasteful competition that erodes their profit margins, leaving them with vast war chests with which to pursue their legislative agenda. As tech consolidated, it began to feel its oats. Narrow interpretations of existing laws were broadened. New, absurd gambits were invented and then accepted by authorities with straight faces. Just as important as the new laws that got tech, or that tech got for itself, were the laws that kept them at bay. Labor laws were treated as non-existent, provided that your boss was an app. Consumer protection laws were likewise jettisoned, and of course, the U.S. never passed a federal privacy law, and the EU struggled to enforce its privacy law. All right, well, that's also an interesting thing that requires just a little bit of comment, I guess, before we move on. What was I thinking of here? Just about narrow interpretations of laws broadened, right? And new absurd gambits invented and then accepted by authorities with straight faces. I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about. Those are some links that would suggest exactly what he's talking about. But this is where I often discuss the judicial seminars very frequently held and hosted by the Law and Economics Institute at what was the George Mason University School of Law, now Antonin Scalia, and our indoctrination in law and economics, which is now familiar to Gil, having gone through a law and economics training in his philosophy of law class. But this is essentially a training program that convinces judges that, well, most directly, that arguments like these later on presented by big tech, the consolidated big tech that grew out of this, teaching judges exactly, well, limiting it really to what they needed to know about tech in order to come to understand why big tech viewed certain concepts in certain ways. And it was mystery to everybody else, but it was imperative to their cases and to being able to, grab hold of enormous chunks of money and enormous chunks of the economy to keep feeding them that money. You needed to convince judges that the internet isn't a series of tubes, and it isn't a big dump truck or whatever it was that Ted Stevens used to say about the internet. But this is just teaching them a new theory about how to regard how apps work and how they capture value, and allow for this weird, absurd situation. If it's just an internet page, that's something different. But if it's wrapped in just enough IP, you can call it something else. It's an app, not a website, even though it is a website. But here, it's one that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act empowers to, strip out your right to privacy and collect money off of you on top of it all. And then, of course, the reference to labor laws were treated as non-existent provided that your boss was an app, right? Meaning you're working for Uber, right? Well, you don't have that much in the way of labor rights because your boss isn't a person, it's an app. All they're doing is making information available to you. They don't employ you. And teaching judges how to buy into such a weird concept was a major project of theirs, and I guess they have succeeded. Now on to the section Cops and Spies. Concentrated sectors of large, highly profitable firms inevitably seek to fuse their power with that of the state, securing from government forbearance for their own actions and prohibitions on activities they disfavor. When it comes to surveillance, the tech sector has powerful allies in government, cops and spies. It goes without saying that cops and spies love commercial surveillance. The very first Snowden revelation concerned a public-private surveillance partnership called PRISM, in which the NSA plundered large internet companies' data with their knowledge and cooperation. The subsequent revelation about the Upstream program revealed that the NSA was also plundering tech giants' data without their knowledge and using PRISM as a plausible deniability fig leaf, so that the tech firms didn't get suspicious when the NSA acted on its stolen intelligence. No government agency could ever hope to match the efficiency and scale of commercial surveillance. The NSA couldn't order us to carry pocket location beacons at all times. Hell, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention couldn't even get us to run an exposure notification app in the early days of the COVID pandemic. No government agency could order us to put all our conversations in writing to be captured, stored, and mined. And not even the U.S. government could afford to run the data centers and software development to store and make sense of it all. And yet here we are doing just that. And I think in what format you're doing it. Meanwhile, the private sector relies on cops and spies to go to bat for them, lobbying against new privacy laws and for lax enforcement of existing ones. Think of Amazon's Ring cameras, which have blanketed entire neighborhoods in CCTV surveillance, which Ring shares with law enforcement agencies, sometimes without the consent or knowledge of the camera's owners. Ring marketing recruits cops as street teams, showering them with freebies to distribute to local homeowners. And when local activists and town councils ponder limitations on this kind of commercial surveillance, the cops go to bat for Ring, insisting that every citizen should have the inalienable right to contribute to an off-the-books video surveillance grid that the cops can access at will. Google, for its part, has managed to play both sides of the culture war with its location surveillance, thanks to reverse warrants that cops have used to identify all the participants at both Black Lives Matter protests and the January 6th coup. Distinguishing between state and private surveillance is a fool's errand. Cops and spies need the surveillance industry, and the surveillance industry needs cops and spies. Since the days of the East India Company, that's a while ago, monopolists have understood the importance of recruiting powerful state actors to go to bat for commercial interests. AT&T, the central node in the Snowden revelations, has been playing this game for a century, foiling regulators' attempts to break up its monopoly for 69 years before the Department of Justice finally eked out a win in 1982, whereupon antitrust was promptly neutered, allowing the baby bells to merge into new monopolies like Verizon. In the 1950s, AT&T came within a whisker of being broken up, but the Pentagon stepped up to defend Ma Bell, telling the Justice Department that America would lose the Korean War if they didn't have an intact AT&T to supply and operate their high-tech back-end. America lost the Korean War, but AT&T won. It got a 30-year reprieve. Stumping for his eponymous trust law in 1890, Senator John Sherman thundered, "If we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of necessaries of life, the necessaries of life. If we would not submit to an emperor, we should not submit to an autocrat of trade." Today, as our snoopy tech firms hide in the skirts of our spies and law enforcement agencies, we have to get beyond the idea that this is surveillance capitalism. Truly, it's more akin to surveillance mercantilism, a fusion of state and commercial power. So now he's got us rethinking the definition of capitalism versus mercantilism. And what was it the other week that we were thinking of? Oh, right, feudalism versus manorialism. And we never did get to the end of that piece. But Cory Doctorow, dense and confusing, but occasionally worth diving into to give us the ability to step out of the everyday scenery, I guess, and view things from a different angle and sometimes see how absurd some parts of our daily lives really are. Okay, there's another one that I've been holding for a while, but I think it has been widely discussed and who knows, may break out and help you understand some of the other weird parts of the scenery surrounding us in our everyday lives. This from a similarly dense and confusing but often revealing author, Brandy Zadrozny at NBC, writing on that weird news-ish organization that you've probably encountered at some time or another and learned to look askance at, the Epoch Times. But not everybody has yet learned the lesson. And we have learned that it's somehow weird and unusual and untrustworthy, but mostly because we disagree immediately with their headlines. But what about finding out a little bit more about exactly what the hell they are, who started them, and why, and who might this crap be working on? How the conspiracy-fueled Epoch Times went mainstream and made millions. I'd like to know how Charles Johnson went mainstream and made millions too, but this is about a different group of right-wing ideologues and weirdos and idiots who have somehow hit the big time and are living it up, while the rest of us, A, suffer under their delusions, and B, don't come anywhere close to making the millions that they do. That's weird. The conservative news outlet has amassed a fortune, she says, growing its revenue by 685% in 2 years, according to tax documents. Let's have a look. In the run-up to the 2020 election, she begins, a small news organization saw an opportunity. It wasn't really a news organization. The Epoch Times, and you know that that's spelled E-P-O-C-H, Epoch Times, directed millions of dollars in advertising toward supporting President Donald Trump's campaign. Why are they doing that? It's not a news organization. And they published dozens of articles parroting his lies about the election, resulting in huge growth to its audience and its coffers. The strategy garnered criticism from fact-checking groups and got it banned from advertising on Facebook, but it ultimately paid off, putting the once fringe newspaper on a path that perhaps only its leader, who claims to have supernatural powers, by the way, could have foreseen. Today, the Epoch Times is one of the country's most successful and influential conservative news organizations. And what's weird about it, of course, when you're talking about these hard right-wing lunatics who love OAN and Newsmax and the like, it's Chinese in ownership, but the good kind of Chinese, not the bad kind of Chinese. Why? I don't know. It's powered by Falun Gong, a religious group persecuted in China, and so therefore part of the good Chinese. The government hates them, so we love them, because the enemy of our enemy, etc. So, powered by Falun Gong, which launched the Epoch Times as a free propaganda newsletter more than 2 decades ago to oppose the Chinese Communist Party. And that is, of course, something that the right-wing lunatics hold near and dear to their heart, opposing the Chinese Communist Party. Even if you're not actually opposing it, if you say something opposes it, that's enough for them. Funded through aggressive online and real-world marketing campaigns and big-money conservative donors, the Epoch Times now boasts to be the country's 4th largest newspaper by subscriber count. Unlike most major newspapers, she says parenthetically, the Epoch Times isn't audited by the 2 major independent collectors of circulation data. The nonprofit has amassed a fortune, growing its revenue by a staggering 685% in 2 years to $122 million in 2021, according to the group's most recent tax records. Its editorial vision, fueled by a right-wing slant and conspiracy theories, is on display in recent reports on how, quote, January 6th Capitol Hill security footage challenges key narratives, and meteorologists, scientists explain why there is no climate emergency. Its video series include a documentary-style film alleging widespread vaccine injury and death, and an expose of an alleged world government agenda to harm farmers, cull the population, and force survivors to eat bugs. Sure. What the Epoch Times lacks in standards, it makes up for in style and form, mirroring the aesthetics of journalism, a feature that's attracted subscribers and big-name supporters. And this has always been the plan for everybody, and what OAN does as well. Anti-vaccine activist and presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We have a sound effect for that guy here somewhere, right? There we go. And, that one, and... That is not how this works! Yeah, both pretty much apply. And almost every one of our sound effects would work for JFK Jr., or RFK Jr., sorry. JFK Jr. is dead, and although he figures in these weirdos' conspiracies too. Anyway, anti-vaccine activist and presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. calls the Epoch Times a daily read among his most trusted news sources. They have a real bias against China. That bothers him, I guess. But on other reporting, they're very courageous, and it's real journalism, Kennedy said in an interview with NBC News this summer. In July, Representative Ralph Norman, a Republican of South Carolina, recited the history of the Epoch Times into the congressional record. This is all about one word, freedom, Norman said. The Epoch Times has yet to throw its weight behind a candidate for 2024, but heading into the election cycle, it is moving into new and bigger office spaces and production studios in California, hiring mainstream news veterans who are not affiliated with Falun Gong, and reviving an ad-buying blitz. Now, the story is illustrated here by supplemented with a video, I guess, about the Epoch Times, which is real interesting in that it has, this is an old school, this video is from August of 2019, but it shows the Epoch Times being distributed from one of like the old school street newspaper vending machines, except it's free newspaper, so you got the things where you would go and you open the door and take the paper out, right? Physical newspaper. You remember those? And of course, it's for the Epoch Times, but prominently displayed all over the thing is the name of the paper. Presumably that's what, but there's Chinese character writing all over the box, designating it, for most Americans, designating it as, I'm not interested in this. This is for the local Chinese American population. I don't take these. But now they've switched over to look like an American newspaper, and with blaring headlines that make the conservatives feel a tingle in their nether regions, they get snapped up and read online. Anyway, so let's see. They hired mainstream news veterans not affiliated with Falun Gong in their big hiring blitz in the run-up to the next elections. They achieved the goal, said Brendan Steinhauser, a Texas-based Republican strategist hired by the Epoch Times in 2018 to open doors to conservative politicians and players. Steinhauser said that a series of interviews and introductions with politicians and media figures at that year's CPAC, essentially, offered access to a wider conservative audience. The Epoch Times was a supporting sponsor for this year's CPAC conference. They take advantage of every opportunity, Steinhauser, who is not currently working for the Epoch Times, continued. They studied digital marketing. They learned how to work the system. And they did it. They're smarter than people give them credit for, and they've got the money to back it up. Maybe that's the more important element. As a nonprofit, despite the fact that they're making huge profits, the Epoch Times is exempt from most federal taxes. That'll make people happy. Its mission, according to tax filings, is independent journalism's, outside of political interests in the pursuit of profit for the public benefit and to be truly responsible to society, except it's actually the opposite. Neither the chairman nor the editor-in-chief of the Epoch Times returned multiple requests for comment because they're super journalists. Representatives for the Epoch Times have previously defended it against critical reporting, labeling reports of the paper's conservative mission and its penchant for misinformation as smears. Epoch Times representatives also deny an affiliation with Falun Gong, despite the two groups' clear financial and organizational ties. The Epoch Times board members and most staff are Falun Gong practitioners. The nonprofits behind the Epoch Times and Friends of Falun Gong, the movement's advocacy organization, share executives and provide grants and services to each other, according to tax filings. And the newspaper, along with a digital production company and the heavily advertised dance troupe Shen Yun, I've seen their posters all over the place, make up a nonprofit network that the leader of the religious movement calls Our Media. And the Moonies run the Washington Times, so weird. In 2009, Li Hongzhi came to speak to his followers, volunteers who worked at the Epoch Times offices in Manhattan. Li's instructions for the group were simple. They needed to reach people outside of the Falun Gong religious community, and they needed to make money, a lot of it. Ensure that the paper gains a foothold in ordinary society and turns profitable, Li said. It's good instruction. Falun Gong, or Falun Dafa, as some followers call it, is a kind of personal development movement started by Li in China in 1992. It combines tenets of Buddhism and Taoism, and followers practice with meditation and flowing breath and movement exercises, and by studying Li's teachings. To his followers, Li is a godlike figure who can levitate, walk through walls, and see into the future. His ultra-conservative and controversial teachings include a rejection of modern science, art, and medicine, and a denunciation of homosexuality, feminism, and general worldliness. In 1999, after thousands of Li's followers silently protested its repression in Beijing, China banned it altogether. Labeling it as a cult, and they seem to be right about that, the Chinese government confiscated Falun Gong books, blocked websites, closed teaching centers, and arrested practitioners. Human rights groups reported a brutal crackdown. Some adherents were sent to labor camps. Others were tortured and killed. International human rights organizations condemned China's attempted eradication. In the U.S., where Li and some of his practitioners had fled, a new collection of followers organized a campaign to raise awareness and sympathy with parades, demonstrations, and pamphlets that touted the benefits of Falun Gong and the brutality of the Chinese Communist Party. The Epoch Times was born out of that leafleting campaign, started in Georgia in 2000 by John Tang, a Falun Gong practitioner who remains its CEO. In essence, it was a Chinese language public relations newsletter. The group's long-term goals were ambitious: to expose the Chinese Communist Party and to save the world in a supernatural war against communism. Easy, right? Through the early aughts, the Epoch Times grew from an online effort to a weekly physical newspaper with a home base in New York and a TV production company, New Tang Dynasty Television. It raised money from followers and was staffed by unpaid volunteers. It ran aggregated articles on international issues from Voice of America next to Thanksgiving Day explainers, dispatches from Falun Gong parades, and exposés on atrocities alleged to have been committed by the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, getting late here and time for us to get out for the day, but there's an awful lot more to this article. We'll read a little bit more and recommend that you take a look at the rest over the weekend. By 2019, it had gone mostly digital and was spending millions of dollars on creating a network of Facebook pages and groups and running aggressive pro-Trump ad campaigns. The move toward explicit support of Republicans, despite Lee's teachings to stay away from U.S. politics, was foreshadowed by Lee's comments at a Falun Gong conference a year before. Lee had said that Falun Gong's media ought to put a constructive spin on the news to advance the group's aims. It wasn't wrong, he said, to favorably cover a politician who shared Falun Gong's conservative values and whose goals aligned with their own. If someone comes along now who can help to halt the downward spiral that the world is in, then he is truly someone extraordinary, Lee said. He would in effect be helping us. Wouldn't he be helping us to save people? The Epoch Times also employed a tactic more often associated with fake news content farms and scammers than news organizations, creating a network of inspiring and cute content pages and fake accounts to inflate the Epoch Times' reach. You get the idea of what they've been up to, and now you get some idea of where they came from. They sort of seem to arrive on the scene from out of nowhere. Interesting background here and interesting ties back to Chinese sources that, because they say they oppose the Chinese Communist Party, are wholeheartedly embraced and endorsed by MAGA World.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Walton.
All right, actually is time now to end the show and to hand things over to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Here's what he's got on tap for you today. The tactics of the extreme right in the speaker fight is to rule or ruin. And then, of course, a collection of stories from around our country and around the entire world. Do stay tuned. We'll see you next week.